Let's look once again at this amazing little story of Zacchaeus who climbed up a sycamore tree. Luke 19. Jericho, you undoubtedly have heard of Jericho, the lowest city on the planet. Elevation 800 or 900 feet below sea level. It's also the oldest city on the planet, the oldest continuously inhabited city anywhere. When Jesus walked through it 2,000 years ago, it was already 9,600 years old, making it now 11,600 years old, still inhabited. In 5 days, I will be there with a group of people from our church, another group of people from a church in Houston, gathered on a bus on our way to Israel on Tuesday. For Friday or Saturday this week, we will be here, the lowest city on earth, the oldest city on earth. And when Jesus came to it and he met Zacchaeus, whom he had his eyes on, he solves the oldest problem on earth. Let me explain. Let me go over this story again because it was read beautifully, but many people don't have this on their mind when they're being read to. Jesus enters Jericho, and he sees a man named Zacchaeus. We know something about Zacchaeus. It says right there in verse 2, he was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. He wasn't a tax collector. He was the head of the thugs, okay? So the thugs were the tax collectors that were licensed by the Roman government to go out and take everything that they could for the government, plus a surcharge for themselves. And Zacchaeus was the head of all of that, and he had that, and he obviously drew a commission, so he was wealthy, he was rich. But he was also short. He didn't have a friend in the world because of the way he had hurt people and abused people, and so he can't get in to see who Jesus was. He hears that he's coming, so he climbs up this sycamore tree. And he's out on the limb looking down, and Jesus, in verse 4, Jesus comes to the place, looks up, and immediately knows who he is, because Jesus, we intuit this, Jesus is there to find Zacchaeus. And Jesus says, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house tonight. So he came down, invited Jesus home. They had dinner or some kind of conversation. There's a grumbling outside the house. And in any event, Zacchaeus stands then and says, behold, I am now going to be a generous person and a restorative person. I'm going to give half of everything I have, plus I'm going to restore fourfold anything that I've wrongly taken. And Jesus says, today salvation has come to this house. So what do we do with this story? Well, many of you know it, maybe from Sunday school, because there's a little jingle that goes on and makes a wonderful little vignette for children to understand. Little jingle that goes, Zacchaeus was a wee little man was he. You know it. He climbed up in a sycamore tree to see what he could see. I can't remember the rest of it, but you get the idea. It's just it's a cartoon. But I want to go back because I think that this is not really a cartoon. It's actually a journey. It's a template. It's an outline that everyone here in this room can somewhere find their lives. You'll find some aspect of Zacchaeus' story of how he heard of Jesus. He wanted to climb up the tree to see who he was, how he came down the tree to embrace the Christ, how he was essentially received the salvation that Jesus had to offer him, and was a changed person, a changed life. And Jesus said of this man, today salvation has come to this house. You'll find yourself on this journey. Watch. First thing we learn about this story is that Jesus came to Jericho with one person in mind, that is Zacchaeus. It doesn't really read that way the first couple verses, but you find out that Jesus is looking up in the tree and he sees a man, and that's the man he came to find, Zacchaeus. And it's absolutely consistent with everything else that you find about Jesus, is that he is a seeker. He is sought by many, but he is essentially a seeker. Remember what Jesus told the woman at the well in John chapter 4, that you worship there, the people in Israel, they worship down in Jerusalem, but the Father is looking for people to worship him. The Father's the seeker. Remember what Jesus said, that he came as likening himself to a great physician. He came to the sick, not to the healthy, but to the sick. And you remember that time in Mark's gospel where Jesus is praying by himself early one morning and the disciples come and they've got all kinds of people who have benefited by the ministry of Jesus or heard about the ministry of Jesus. They've seen him heal, they've seen him teach, they've seen him cast out demons, and the disciples come and they find Jesus and they say, "Where have you been? We've got tons of people waiting for you that are seeking you." And Jesus said the most wonderful but odd thing. He said, "Let's go on. Let's move on out of here, that I may preach and heal elsewhere, for that is why I came out." Do you get the point I'm making? That Jesus is a seeker, and he's looking for people. And the most scary and the most wonderful thing of all is when you realize he's looking at you. He's looking to find you, to draw you into his life. I've been out visiting a number of people in our church. We're doing a project here that I'll lay out for you at the first quarter of next year. But it's caused me to go out and just visit with about 30 families in our church. And I sit in their living room or at Starbucks or someplace, and we start talking about a number of things. And we usually often get to the issues of faith. How did you come to faith? And the stories I would tell you have just delighted my heart. Typically, it goes something like this. I wasn't looking for a church. I wasn't looking to get involved. I wanted a place to go. I wanted a place to, my kids could go to Sunday school, but I've met something there. I met someone at that church, Jesus, and I wasn't looking for him. But I sat in the pew with my arms folded, stories like this, and said, "Show me." And little by little, through prayer, through message, through music, through communion, they have felt that God has sought them and drawn them into his life. And these men that I speak with, successful businessmen, they can't not cry when they tell the story of how they weren't looking for this. But they realize now that God had his eye on them. Jesus walks into the lowest spot on the planet and finds this man, Zacchaeus. About 10 years ago, Fran and I were leading a tour to the Holy Land. And one of the things that we do on the Holy Land, we go to the Dead Sea, which is right in this general vicinity of Jericho. If you look at a map of the Middle East, if you look at topographically, what it looks like, God just took a giant meat cleaver and just started to cut the world in half right there. And there's a huge scar, a central rift in the Rift Valley, right there in the middle of the Holy Land. It's the lowest spot on the earth. The Dead Sea itself, 1,200 feet below sea level. All the water around the region runs in, but doesn't run out. As a result, it's very salty, this Dead Sea. The ocean is about 2 or 3% salt, which is salty enough, but the Dead Sea is about 25% salt. And the texture, the feel of the water is like glycerin. And so when you get in it, you don't sink, you float. You feel like you're in a bowl of cold, half-set-up Jell-O. And your feet are sticking up, and your head sticks up, and your hands stick up, and you cannot sink. And people do this. Tourists and pilgrims do this all the time, and our group was no different. We were in there, and then everybody got out because it was cold, and This guy named Richard and I were in at the very end, all by ourselves, and I looked all the way south, and I could see no one else in the Dead Sea. And I looked north, and I could see no one else floating in the Dead Sea. And I looked to Richard, and I said, Richard, right now, you and I are the lowest men on earth. That's where Jesus came. He will seek and find you no matter where you are. Some of you experience, like I say, this is a template, this is an outline for your own journey. Some of you are right there. You're thinking like Zacchaeus, you are so far removed, so pulled back, so distant from God. And I want you to know that the Father, through his Son, is on a rescue mission. He sent out his scout, and Jesus is there to find you. Second thing we learn about this story is that Zacchaeus has heard about Jesus through the commotion. He's intrigued by who Jesus is. Look at verse 3. He says, and it says, and Zacchaeus was seeking to see who Jesus was. Don't you love that? Seeking to see who Jesus was. And that is where some of you are already. You're seeking to see who this man is, this astonishing, magnificent, amazing, powerful man. This man, Jesus, who is the center, the fulcrum, the pivot of human history, has such a compelling personality that people sought him, and people were eager to do whatever it took to be obedient to him. Do you remember what Jesus said to the fishermen? He said, drop your nets and follow me. I'll make you fishers of men. And the Bible says they dropped their nets immediately. The crowd presses in on Jesus from every side passionately. Nicodemus can't wait to get to Jesus. He comes to him at night to ask him questions privately. There is such an interest and an intrigue about who Jesus is. If you understood his personality, if you bothered to read the red letters in the Bible, you would say, this is an amazing person. You'd be just like Zacchaeus. I have to put myself in a position where I can see and I can know, I can find out who this man is. I am seeking to see this man. One group of people came to Philip and said, Sir, we wish to see Jesus. This whole entourage that is with me, we wish to see Jesus. And you see this amazing story here. Zacchaeus, rich man, short, unable to see for himself, will do anything he can to put himself where he can see, including humiliating himself by climbing up a giant sycamore tree.
We thank you for joining us online. The ministries of Christ Church Plano are made possible by generous contributions from our members and viewers. If you have found this sermon meaningful and would like to make a gift of support, please visit christchurchplano.org/give. Thank you.